When you drive over a massive suspension bridge, you don't really think about the cables holding it up. You just trust them.
Right. You just assume they're going to hold.
Exactly. But imagine if you suddenly put like 10 times the weight on that bridge while simultaneously blasting the steel cables with a blowtorch.
Okay, that is an intense visual.
Right. Because at that point, you're not just driving, you are waiting for something to snap. And while that bridge is basically our global infrastructure right now.
Yeah, that's a really accurate way to frame it.
And in our source material today, which is the June 29, 2026 morning briefing, we are looking at the literal and geopolitical blowtorches currently aimed at it. Because we've got a massive stack of intelligence here. We're covering everything from near-miss conflicts in the Middle East and a blistering European heat wave to these just record-breaking tech investments and intense cyber warfare.
It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. So the mission of our deep dive today, for you listening, is to take all these seemingly disconnected events and uncover the underlying mechanism, like how the physical stresses on our world are accelerating our reliance on technology, and how that reliance is forcing humanity to rapidly draw new boundaries.
Because we are seeing that physical stress testing happening immediately. I mean, just look at the macro events in the briefing. Geopolitics and climate are colliding, and it's creating this unprecedented load on global systems.
Yeah, let's start with the geopolitical front, because the U.S. and Iran have just stepped back from the brink of a renewed war.
Barely step back.
Barely. After a highly tense weekend of missile and drone strikes across the Gulf, both sides have actually paused the attacks, and they agreed to set up technical talks in Qatar.
Which is huge, considering global oil prices just violently spiked. And, former President Trump issues this really stark warning that Iran would, quote, no longer exist if forced into a full-scale war.
Right, so the diplomatic heat is literally threatening to boil over in the Gulf. But then Europe is dealing with an entirely different, literal kind of heat.
Yeah, the early summer heat wave, it is brutal.
It's scorching the continent. I mean, temperatures are pushing near 40 degrees Celsius across France, Italy, Switzerland. Germany just hit a June record of nearly 42 degrees.
Wow.
And France has already reported 1,000 excess deaths. The World Health Organization linked 1,300 deaths continent-wide to this specific heat wave, and they explicitly warn that Europe's infrastructure is severely underprepared.
Yeah, and that's where your bridge analogy really holds up. I look at this like global infrastructure is a giant rubber band being stretched from two opposite ends.
Oh, like that.
You've got geopolitical heat pulling on one side,
Yeah.
right, and atmospheric heat pulling on the other. And to understand how much tension is on that rubber band, you really have to look at the invisible digital infrastructure holding it all together.
Because it's all connected now.
Exactly. Take the Gulf tensions. When the Strait of Hormuz is even slightly threatened, maritime routing systems, they don't just alert a captain. Algorithmic logistics networks have to instantly recalculate global shipping lanes.
So they're adjusting port scheduling, fueling stops.
Insurance risk models. And they're doing this millisecond by millisecond. Simultaneously, the cyber defenses guarding oil extraction and refinement facilities, they have to automatically elevate their threat postures. Because kinetic physical conflicts are now universally preceded and mirrored by digital attacks.
So if the Gulf is testing our logistical software, the heat wave in Europe feels like a stress test of the actual physical hardware.
Without a doubt.
Because, I mean, think about it. When it hits 42 degrees Celsius in Germany, millions of HVAC systems kick on at the exact same time.
And the mechanical strain of that is staggering, because heat actually increases electrical resistance. So power lines physically heat up, they expand, and they sag.
Wait, they physically sag?
Yeah, which causes them to lose transmission efficiency or even risk arcing. So to prevent a catastrophic blackout, smart grid software has to dynamically balance this unprecedented load in real time. It communicates with industrial battery storage facilities, deciding whether to discharge stored solar power or, throttle down non-essential industrial consumers.
And the irony here, which is just wild to me, is the data centers running those massive load balancing calculations are fighting against the exact same ambient heat just to keep their own servers from melting down.
Right, which demands even more power for their cooling systems.
So it's this vicious cycle. And if the rubber band is stretched this thin, it really seems like we are entirely dependent on these data centers and smart grids just to keep society from snapping. I mean, if you're listening to this, you depend on these invisible systems to buy groceries, power your home, get your medication.
Yeah, if the grid fails, the global supply chain doesn't just slow down. It shudders to a complete halt.
And the margin for error is essentially zero.
Exactly zero. And that physical fragility, the fact that our systems are currently too slow and too siloed to handle compounding global crises, that is what's driving this desperate, unprecedented rush to build technology capable of managing the chaos.
Right, which brings us to the AI boom. And look, if you're listening, you've probably lived through a dozen different AI hype cycles. It always sounds like just another software update.
But the briefing highlights a shift that proves this isn't just a software fad anymore.
No, this is concrete being poured. Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung just announced a sprawling new semiconductor manufacturing hub. And the price tag is $518 billion US.
Which is over 800 trillion won.
Just an astronomical amount of money.
It is. But a $500 billion physical investment indicates a fundamental paradigm shift. We are no longer treating artificial intelligence as a theoretical concept or, a clever chatbot. South Korea is betting its entire economic future on the reality that AI is now fundamental physical infrastructure. It's as essential to the 21st century as the electrical grid was to the 20th. And the reason they're spending $518 billion is specifically to build the next generation of AI logic and memory chips.
Okay, wait, let me pause you there. Why memory chips specifically? Like, why is that the bottleneck requiring a $500 billion fix?
So it comes down to how AI actually processes information compared to older computers. I mean, traditional computing is linear, right? It reads a book one word at a time very quickly.
Okay.
But AI relies on massive parallel processing. It doesn't just read one book. It needs to read 10,000 books simultaneously, cross-reference every single word, and identify patterns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and to do that, the data can't just be sitting in slow, long-term storage. It has to be held in high-bandwidth memory right next to the logic chips doing the math. And fabricating those ultra-dense memory chips requires extreme ultraviolet lithography machines.
Which are not cheap.
No, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars each. And they have to operate in clean rooms that are literally cleaner than the vacuum of space.
That is just, it's hard to wrap your head around. But when you look at the results of that parallel processing, the price tag starts to make sense. Because the source material highlights a massive breakthrough presented at the ASCO 2026 medical meeting.
Right, radiology AI.
Yes. We now have commercially available radiology AI that can spot early signs of breast cancer up to 6 years before a clinical diagnosis. 6 years.
And the mechanism of how it detects that cancer is a perfect example of why those memory chips are so crucial. Because the AI doesn't look at an X-ray the way a human eye does.
How does it see it then?
It ingests the scan as millions of individual pixel gradients. And because it was trained on vast data sets of historical scans, which is all held in that high bandwidth memory we just talked about, it can instantly detect microcalcifications or subtle tissue asymmetries.
Things a doctor would just miss.
Things that are physically beneath the contrast threshold of the human eye. It's perceiving a mathematical pattern of illness years before it manifests as a visible tumor.
And here's where it gets interesting. The briefing makes a point to note that medical experts are insisting this AI must only be used to support doctors, not replace them. They really emphasize that fairness and clinical validation are still paramount.
Right, that's the official stance.
But I have to push back on that framing. Because if this medical AI is just a tool to support doctors, why does it require an entirely new $500 billion global supply chain? It feels like the medical community is pretending we're just building a fancy new digital stethoscope when we're actually building an entirely new digital brain.
Well, the medical community's hesitation is rooted in liability and the nuances of patient care. But technologically speaking, your assessment is perfectly accurate. I mean, a stethoscope simply amplifies a physical sound for a human brain to interpret. These AI systems are generating entirely new diagnostic insights that no human brain could ever reach on its own. They're running tumor boards and trial matching protocols by synthesizing global medical literature in seconds.
So it's doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The AI isn't replacing the doctor's bedside manner or their ultimate ethical judgment, but it is entirely replacing the human limitation of data analysis.
And if we are literally building a digital brain capable of analyzing reality at a scale we can't even perceive, it makes total sense why we are suddenly seeing this massive, aggressive push to build boundaries around it.
Yeah,
because you can't just let a $500 billion digital brain loose without a skull to contain it.
And governments are realizing they are vastly behind the curve on building that skull. The briefing actually details a new AI Policy Institute poll showing strong bipartisan voter support for tighter AI regulations. But the approaches to those regulations are coming from wildly different angles.
Yeah, and looking at the sources impartially, for you listening, it seems like everyone is trying to pull a different lever here. On the legislative side, progressives are proposing new taxes specifically targeting AI profits ahead of the midterms.
Right.
But then on the enforcement side, local police departments are rapidly expanding their use of AI for surveillance and predictive policing. And at the federal level, the White House just issued an executive order steering all AI policy directly toward national security priorities.
So those are attempts to corral the economic and military power of the technology. But the most visceral boundaries being drawn right now, the ones that really affect daily life, are the ones meant to protect youth.
Oh, absolutely. Like what's happening in Australia.
Exactly. Australia just introduced highly aggressive legislation to bulletproof its world-first ban on under-16s using social media platforms. So we're talking TikTok, Snapchat.
And they aren't messing around. They are doubling the financial penalties for tech platforms that fail to enforce the age gates.
And we are seeing that exact same impulse in American classrooms. The Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the second largest in the U.S., they just approved sweeping new screen time limits.
Yeah, they've instituted a total device ban for the youngest grades and strict caps for older students. Supporters are championing student well-being, while critics are pointing out that this might create, uneven access to non-digital learning materials for disadvantaged students.
Which is a valid concern, but the neurological mechanism behind these bans is critical to understand. A developing human brain relies on physical, real-world interactions to build structural neural pathways.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So a child learns cause and effect by dropping a physical block, or they learn empathy by reading the microexpressions on a parent's face. When you replace that physical development with an algorithmic screen, you are essentially hijacking the brain's dopamine system before its executive function has even formed.
Because the apps are designed to be addictive.
Exactly. The platforms are engineered to create frictionless engagement loops. And that directly erodes a child's capacity for sustained attention and emotional regulation.
But trying to enforce these bans, it feels like trying to enforce a strict vegetable diet in a house where the walls are made of candy.
It's a great analogy.
Because how are schools supposed to teach digital citizenship or limit screen time when the entire global economy, driven by that massive South Korean AI chip investment we just talked about, is demanding that every single aspect of life becomes fully digital by default?
It's an incredibly tough balance. It requires a societal compartmentalization that we just haven't mastered yet. The goal of the Los Angeles district isn't to pretend the digital economy doesn't exist. It's to delay entry into that economy long enough for the child to develop cognitive resilience.
You have to build the foundation first.
Right. You have to build a foundational architecture of the human mind before you connect it to the global network.
But here's the scary part. If we can't even successfully keep teenagers off of unauthorized apps, how are we supposed to defend the actual critical digital infrastructure those apps run on? Because the briefing makes it very clear that the digital walls guarding our data are failing spectacularly.
Yeah, the cyber warfare section of the briefing illustrates exactly how porous those walls are. We are looking at two massive interconnected breaches here. First, a cybercrime group known as Shiny Hunters leaked 3.1 terabytes of incredibly sensitive data.
That is a massive amount of data.
It is. And they did this by exploiting a critical zero-day vulnerability in Oracle PeopleSoft, directly hitting the National Association of Insurance Commissioners here in the U.S.
And for you listening, if you aren't familiar, a zero-day vulnerability is terrifying because of the mechanics of how it works. It means the hackers found a flaw in the software's code before the vendor, in this case, Oracle, even knew it existed.
So the vendor has had 0 days to write a security patch.
Exactly. It's like finding a hidden door in the vault before the bank has even installed the security cameras.
And because PeopleSoft is this foundational enterprise software used for HR and finance across massive corporations, a single hidden door exposes an ocean of regulatory filings and personal data. But it's the second breach in the briefing that shows how attackers actually monetize that stolen data.
Right, the KDDI breach.
Yeah, Japanese telecom giant KDDI disclosed a breach exposing 14.2 million email logins across 6 different internet service providers.
And attackers don't just sit on 14 million passwords, right?
Yeah,
They use them to pick other locks.
exactly, through a mechanism called credential stuffing.
How does that work?
Well, attackers feed those 14 million email and password combinations into automated scripts. And these scripts use proxy networks to bypass basic security limits. So they're firing login attempts at banking portals, healthcare systems, corporate VPNs at thousands of requests per second.
Just hoping for a match.
Right. They are banking on human psychology. The fact that a huge percentage of people use the exact same password for their telecom provider as they do for their bank account.
Guilty as charged, honestly.
Most people are. And it proves that a vulnerability in one isolated system instantly cascades across the entire global tech supply chain.
But the briefing does give us a counterattack, thankfully. Europol just led this massive international takedown called Operation Endgame.
Which was highly coordinated.
Yeah, they systematically dismantled the Steel Sea and Amity infostealer networks. They seized hundreds of command and control servers, they froze $47 million in criminal cryptocurrency, and recovered 27 million stolen login credentials, partnering closely with private companies like Microsoft.
And taking down those specific command and control servers alters the underlying economics of the cybercrime ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because infostealer networks operate as the initial access brokers for the digital underworld.
Meaning they're the ones breaking in first.
Yes. They steal the credentials and then sell them to the ransomware cartels who deploy the actual destructive attacks. So by severing that supply chain, Europol is starving the larger cartels of their entry points.
I get the strategy, I do. But recovering 27 million credentials feels like changing the locks on your front door when the thief has already published the blueprints to your house on the internet. I mean, KDDI lost 14 million logins in a single afternoon. Doesn't the sheer scale of automated cybercrime completely outpace international law enforcement's ability to seize physical servers? Like, aren't they just bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon?
The asymmetry is absolutely the core problem. A hacker only needs to find one unpatched zero-day vulnerability, while a defender has to successfully patch millions of endpoints flawlessly.
Right.
So Operation Endgame doesn't solve the vulnerability of the internet. It simply increases the operational cost and legal risk for the attackers. It forces them to burn time and capital rebuilding their infrastructure from scratch.
Yeah.
And that buys a narrow window of time for organizations to implement multi-factor authentication and patch their systems. But you are entirely correct. The digital borders we rely on are fundamentally compromised.
So let's take a breath here. With the physical world literally overheating, geopolitical cables snapping, and hackers constantly breaching our digital vaults, it is incredibly easy to look at this briefing and feel entirely overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you look closely at the undercurrent of these stories, the most powerful forces at play aren't $518 billion AI chips or zero-day exploits. The most powerful forces are humans actively choosing to restore their physical world and each other.
Yeah, the data on environmental and human restoration in this briefing is highly significant. Starting ecologically, marine biologists are confirming a global turning point. The world's mangrove forests are gaining more ground than they are losing, for the first time in decades.
And the mechanics of how mangroves restore the environment are incredible. They don't just block storm surges with their physical root structures. They create this unique oxygen-deprived soil environment underwater that traps massive amounts of carbon for millennia.
Effectively bearing the heat that is stressing our climate.
Ex-
And the recovery of those mangroves is a result of synchronized human effort. It's a combination of top-down legal protections, like the creation of a new marine reserve the size of France,
Wow.
and bottom-up, community-led planting initiatives stretching all the way from Kenya to Southeast Asia. It is empirical proof that sustained structural intervention can reverse what was widely assumed to be an inevitable environmental collapse.
And we are seeing that exact same mechanism of structural intervention applied to human lives. Because the briefing notes that California's Corrections Department just celebrated 135 incarcerated students earning their bachelor's degrees,
Which is their largest cohort ever.
achieved through college programs run directly inside state facilities. And similar higher education programs are rapidly expanding in Nevada and New York.
And from a sociological standpoint, providing higher education within the prison system fundamentally alters a person's trajectory. It relies on cognitive neuroplasticity.
Rewiring how they see themselves.
Exactly. Rewiring their self-perception and giving them the critical thinking skills and the credentialed pathways required to integrate into the modern, knowledge-based economy upon release. The data consistently shows that this type of structural support drastically reduces recidivism rates.
You know, the mangrove recovery and the prison education program,
Yeah.
they're running on the exact same engine.
How so?
Well, both involve looking at a system in long-term decline, whether it's an eroding coastline taking a beating from storms or a marginalized human life trapped in the justice system. You provide a protective, structured environment, give it time, and prove that sustained human effort can force growth to return.
That's a great point. They both require a foundational belief that the future architecture of a system can be engineered to be healthier than its past, provided there is patience and investment.
And we also see humanity engineering joy, right? Like shared reality online, cutting right through the doom scrolling.
Definitely.
Looking at the cultural trends in the briefing, millions of people are finding a daily psychological anchor in sharing their New York Times connections and Wordle streaks.
A daily ritual for so many.
Yeah. And we have the sheer viral entertainment of Drewski's Bet Awards skit, the wild highlight knockouts of Celebrity Fight Night, and the absolute global obsession over the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding rumors.
And while it is really easy to dismiss pop culture, these touchstones serve a vital function in maintaining social cohesion. I mean, in a world fragmented by geopolitical stress and isolated by algorithmic feeds, these shared narratives provide a common vocabulary.
It's low stakes.
Exactly. They create a low-stakes environment for human bonding that transcends geographic and political borders.
Which brings everything we've talked about today full circle. The briefing concludes with the 2026 FIFA World Cup, hosted across North America. Millions of fans from every corner of the globe are pouring across physical borders. But the viral story sweeping the internet isn't the scores on the pitch.
No, it's the hospitality.
Yes. The localized response has been remarkable. Residents are going entirely out of their way to provide home-cooked meals, impromptu city tours, and genuine warmth to international strangers who speak entirely different languages.
It is the ultimate counter-narrative to the heavy headlines of global conflict we started with.
It really is, which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. We started by looking at a world under immense stress, a bridge being blasted by a blowtorch. We explored how society is desperately responding by pouring $500 billion into AI chips to manage our failing systems and legislating massive digital walls to protect our children's brains from the very technology we are building.
Right, we are hyper-fixated on engineering a flawless digital brain to save us, while frantically trying to regulate the digital spaces that pull us apart.
But if human connection a shared puzzle, a degree earned behind bars, a home-cooked meal for a stranger, if that is the actual mechanism that keeps society from snapping under pressure, maybe our tech obsession is blinding us to a hard truth.
Was the truth.
Well, think about it. If we keep building digital systems so complex that they require constant algorithmic management of our lives, are we eventually going to reach a point where governments have to engineer forced offline zones?
Like physical sanctuaries.
Exactly. Physical sanctuaries where digital signal are legally blocked, not just to protect our data, but to force us to remember how to be human. Are our physical borders where we're actually most eager to connect?
It's an urgent question, because we may find that the ultimate luxury of the future isn't access to the network, but the guaranteed right to disconnect from it.
Stay curious, keep seeking out those underlying mechanisms, and thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. See you next time.